All right, today we're going to get into something pretty intense. We're going to pull back the curtain on a really high-stakes practice, and we're going to do it by looking at actual documented online discussions from within the escort community to understand the motivations, the risks, and, the fallout. Okay, first things first, we need to get on the same page with the key term here. The entire conversation we're about to have really hinges on one acronym you'll see a lot in the source material: BBFS, and that stands for Bareback Full Service. To put it plainly, it means sexual intercourse without a condom. So here's our game plan for this explainer. We're going to start by looking at things from the client's perspective, to figure out where this demand is even coming from. Then we'll get into the tough spot this puts providers in. After that, we'll trace the cascade of consequences, the real-world stuff that's been documented. And finally, we'll see how the entire community has had to deal with it all. All right, let's jump right in with the first big question. Why is there such a consistent demand for this kind of service? And how are the people asking for it, squaring that with the obvious risks? Well, one thing becomes crystal clear right away when you look at the source material. All these forum posts from clients who often call themselves hobbyists, this isn't some rare fringe thing they're asking for. The demand for BBFS encounters is there, and it is significant. Now, this is where it gets really interesting. The way this demand is communicated, it's often not direct. This post points out how a phrase like the wife experience is basically used as a code word. That suggests that what clients are really chasing is a feeling of intimacy, something more personal, and they see unprotected sex as the way to achieve that. But hang on, it's not just a one-way street. This post from a client totally flips the script. He claims his all-time favorite provider was actually the one pushing the idea. So this really complicates the narrative, right? It shows that the pressure isn't always coming from just one side. And then you get to the really extreme end of the spectrum. This is a story about a client who got blacklisted, and his justification? He doesn't just minimize the risks, he completely dismisses them. He calls all the information about STDs and AIDS propaganda. I mean, that level of denial is a pretty powerful way to rationalize taking such a massive risk.
Okay, so we've heard the client's side. Now let's flip it and look at the provider's perspective, because this demand creates a huge conflict. The community is clearly split on how to handle it.
And this is where you really see that split. On one side, you have providers who are very, very public about refusing, complaining about it, even calling out clients who ask. But then, on the other side, the source material shows there's another, quieter reality. Some providers do offer the service, but only to very select, trusted clients. Or they'll even refer the request to someone else they know is willing. So what this all boils down to is that there's no single, unified response here. It's a whole spectrum. It goes from loud, public condemnation all the way to a much more private, underground market where the service is available if you know who to ask and who to trust. And this, of course, leads us to the inevitable part of the story. What happens when these risks stop being theoretical? The arguments and rationalizations just fall apart in the face of documented, real-world health problems that end up affecting everyone. Now, the source material gives us this incredibly powerful first-person account from a provider. She basically decided to change everything about how she worked after a series of really scary events. Her story starts when another provider came to her with some bad news. So the whole crisis kicks off when this other provider gets diagnosed. She's upset. She promises our narrator that she'll work completely safe from now on. And then, just 2 days later, our narrator sees a review showing she's already broken that promise. That one decision, to keep working unprotected while knowing she was infectious, set off a terrifying chain reaction. And the fallout was immediate. A client of that infected provider then contacts our narrator to book a session. When she tells him he might have been exposed, his reaction just says it all. He's married. And suddenly, this problem has spread far, far beyond that initial encounter. A friend of the narrator actually mapped it all out for her, which is what this slide shows. You can think of it like a web or a tree of risk. It shows exactly how one person's single choice not to disclose can branch out and create this huge network of potential exposure, putting the whole community at risk.
And believe me, this was not a one-off thing. The sources point to other major scares too, like this HIV scandal in the DC community back in 2011. The whole thing unfolded publicly on the forums over a couple of months.
Yeah, when you dig into the sources, you see this is a recurring theme. It's not just that one herpes story or the DC scandal. There are documented syphilis scares in Baltimore, providers quitting because of chlamydia, reports of people working with hepatitis, even arrests for knowingly spreading HIV. The health risk isn't just one thing, it's varied, and it's always there.
So, with all this going on, you have to ask, how does the community as a whole react? How does behavior change when everybody suddenly realizes they're facing a shared threat? This one quote from the provider who shared her story really became the rallying cry. It just perfectly sums up the problem, right? In a community this interconnected, one person's risk immediately becomes everybody's risk. You're all in it together. And here's where things get kinda wild. A real ironic twist. After one of these big scares, fear really took over, and the whole dynamic just flipped on its head. According to the forum posts, some clients, the same group that had been driving the demand for more risk, suddenly started demanding more safety from providers. So where does that leave everyone? Well, for the provider at the heart of that herpes story, this was her takeaway. After trying to warn people and realizing she couldn't control what they did, she decided the only thing she could control was herself, her own actions, her own boundaries.
And that's really the big question that hangs over all of this, isn't it? When everybody is swimming in the same pool, when one person's choice can directly impact the health of dozens of other people, is personal responsibility really enough? Or at some point, does the safety of the group have to come first?